The ballroom was a galaxy of cut glass and whispered power. Imani Tanaka stood near the French doors overlooking the Shinjuku Gyoen National Garden, a silent statue carved from ivory and steel. Her sleeveless, white dress was a column of elegant simplicity, a stark contrast to the opulent chaos of the gala. It was the annual gathering of the Kanto clans, a night where allegiances were tested and fortunes were decided in the space between a handshake and a nod. As the wife of Kaido Tanaka, the formidable head of the Tanakagumi, her role was simple: to be beautiful, to be silent, and to be a testament to his good taste. For 5 years, she had played the part to perfection. The air in the room shifted, a subtle drop in pressure that signaled his arrival. She did not need to turn. She felt it in the way the conversations nearest to her faltered, the way the laughter became brittle. Kaido moved through the world, as if he owned the very air people breathed. He was a man of lethal stillness, his power expressed in the perfect tailoring of his Tom Ford suit and the cold, calculating depths of his dark eyes. But tonight, he was not alone. On his arm was a woman who was Imani's opposite in every conceivable way. She was younger, her body draped in a searing red dress that clung to her like a second skin. Her laughter was loud, her gestures theatrical. She was Rina, a hostess from Ginza he had been seeing for 6 months, a secret the entire Tokyo underworld knew but pretended to ignore out of deference to him. Or out of fear. Imani remained perfectly still, her fingers resting on the cool glass of her champagne flute. She watched them in the reflection from the window. Kaido guided Rina toward the center of the room, his hand possessively on the small of her back. He was making a statement. This was not a discreet affair. It was a coronation. He stopped near a group of his most important captains and several influential businessmen. His voice, usually a low and controlled instrument of command, was deliberately loud, carrying across the polished marble floor. "Gentlemen," he announced, his gaze sweeping the room before landing, with pointed indifference on Imani. "I want you to meet Rina, a woman of fire." Of passion, he squeezed Rina's arm, and she giggled, a sound like breaking glass. Something this world has been sorely lacking. The insult was a physical thing, a shard of ice sliding between Imani's ribs. It was meant to humiliate her, to strip her of the quiet dignity that was her only armor in this brutal world. She saw the pity in the eyes of some, the cruel satisfaction in the eyes of others. His captains, men who had bowed to her that very morning, now looked at their feet, at the ceiling, anywhere but at her. They were his men, and his disrespect was their command. Imani did not flinch. She did not look away. She slowly raised her glass, the barest hint of a smile touching her lips, and met her husband's gaze across the crowded room. He expected tears. He expected a scene. He expected her to shatter. Instead, she gave him a nod, a silent acknowledgement. In that moment, watching him flaunt his cheap victory, she did not feel the sting of betrayal. She felt the cold, clean click of a lock disengaging. He had just handed her a key. He thought he was shaming his wife. He had no idea he was creating his enemy. The war had begun, and he would not even know he was a casualty until his entire empire was nothing but ash at her feet. The ride back to their penthouse in the sky above Roppongi Hills was a study in suffocating silence. Kaido sat across from her in the back of the armored Maybach, the scent of Rina's cloying perfume still clinging to his suit. He was radiating a smug, predatory energy, waiting for the dam to break. He wanted the confrontation, the tears, the screaming match that would validate his actions and allow him to play the part of the aggrieved husband, pushed to this by her supposed coldness. Imani gave him nothing. She simply watched the neon-drenched streets of Tokyo blur past, her expression serene, her hands resting calmly in her lap. When they entered the sprawling apartment, with its panoramic views of the city lights, he finally broke the silence. "Are you not going to say anything?" he demanded, pulling off his tie with a sharp, angry tug. Imani walked over to the bar, her movements fluid and unhurried. She poured herself a glass of water, the clink of the bottle against the crystal glass the only sound in the room. "Should I?" she asked, her voice even. She turned to face him, leaning back against the cool marble of the counter. You made your statement quite clearly at the gala. It seemed to require no further commentary. His eyes narrowed. This was not the reaction he had anticipated. He was a man who understood violence and passion, but her quiet composure was a language he had forgotten how to speak. Do not play these games with me, Imani. You are my wife. You will show me respect. Respect is earned, Kaido. Not demanded, she replied softly. And it is certainly not demonstrated by parading your mistress in front of your entire organization. She took a slow sip of water, her gaze unwavering. But that is your affair. I have a question about something else. He was thrown off balance. What? The Odate shipping ledgers. I was looking at the quarterly reports you left on your desk. The fuel expenditures for the Yokohama route seem inflated, almost by 30%. Kaido stared at her, baffled. Of all the things she could have brought up, his clandestine business dealings were the last he expected. He had always believed she was willfully ignorant of the mechanics of his empire, content to manage the household and his social calendar. That is none of your concern. Everything in this house is my concern, she said, her voice still quiet but now laced with something hard and unyielding. An inefficiency of that magnitude suggests either theft or incompetence. Which is it? He scoffed, a harsh, dismissive sound. You know nothing of my business. He walked towards his study, ready to end the conversation. Go to bed. Imani watched him go, a flicker of something cold and triumphant in her chest. He was just as she had calculated, arrogant, dismissive, and utterly convinced of her irrelevance. He saw her as a beautiful ornament, incapable of understanding the complexities of his world. He had no idea that for 5 years, she had been a silent student. She had listened to every hushed phone call, read every document left carelessly on his desk, and memorized the names of every captain, every ally, and every enemy. She understood his empire better than he knew. He thought the argument was about his mistress. He was wrong. The argument was about his throne, and she had just made her first move to take it. 2 days later, Imani requested a private tea with Haru Yoshida, Kaido's youngest and most ambitious captain. She chose a quiet, traditional tea house in Yanaka, a place of old-world discretion far from the glittering towers of Shinjuku where Kaido held court. Haru was a man seething with ambition, held back only by Kaido's preference for older, more seasoned lieutenants. He was a blade in search of a hand to wield it, and Imani intended to be that hand. She wore a simple but elegant kimono, the picture of a traditional, dutiful wife. When Haru arrived, he bowed low, his expression a mixture of confusion and deference. The boss's wife never requested such meetings. Yoshida-san, Imani began, her voice as smooth as the silk of her kimono. Thank you for coming on such short notice.
Tanaka-sama.
It is my honor, he said, his eyes wary. She poured the green tea with practiced grace, the silence stretching between them. She did not mention the gala. She did not mention Rina. To do so would be to show weakness, to frame this as the complaint of a scorned woman. Instead, she spoke of business. My husband values your loyalty and your enthusiasm, she said, choosing the word carefully. He often speaks of the fire you bring to the organization. Haru preened slightly, his chest puffing out. I serve the boss with everything I have. I know, Imani said, her eyes meeting his. Which is why I was so surprised when I heard the new arrangements for the Hakodate port expansion. A flicker of confusion crossed his face. The Hakodate port. Yes, she continued, her tone laced with feigned sympathy. A very lucrative deal. Kaido has decided to entrust it entirely to Captain Mori. He feels it requires a more seasoned hand. The lie was a masterpiece of misdirection. There was a Hakodate deal, but Kaido had not yet assigned it. By naming Mori, Haru's direct rival, she had lit a fuse. Haru's face tightened, the mask of deference slipping to reveal the raw ambition beneath. Mori? But he bungled the Osaka negotiations last year. My husband's decisions are his own, Imani said, a delicate shrug in her voice. But I confess I worry. His focus has been divided of late, She let the implication hang in the air, a direct reference to the public spectacle with Rina. She was not a scorned wife. She was a concerned partner, worried that her husband's personal indiscretions were clouding his business judgment. A leader who cannot command his own house risks losing the respect of his men. And a man who overlooks his most capable soldiers in favor of old fools, well, that is a dangerous path. She took a slow sip of her tea, watching the poison she had just administered do its work. Haru was silent, his mind racing. She had given him everything he needed, a reason to feel slighted, a justification for action, and a target for his ambition. She hadn't asked him to betray Kaido. She had simply made it seem like his own brilliant idea. The fallout from the Hakodate port deal was swift and brutal. Haru, believing he was being sidelined, used his contacts at the docks to leak crucial details of the negotiation to Kaido's chief rival, the Suzuki clan. The deal collapsed overnight, costing the Tanakagumi millions and, more importantly, causing a significant loss of face. Kaido was incandescent with rage. He tore his office apart, the sound of splintering wood and shattering glass echoing through the penthouse. Imani found him standing amidst the wreckage, a bottle of whiskey in his hand, his knuckles bloody. His suspicion, as she had predicted, fell squarely on the Suzuki clan. The thought of a traitor within his own ranks was inconceivable to him. His arrogance was his blind spot. "They mock me," he snarled, his voice a low growl. "They think I am weak." Imani walked over to the window, looking down at the sprawling city that was his kingdom. "They did not act without reason," she said calmly. "Someone gave them the leverage they needed." He turned on her, his eyes blazing. "What do you know about it?" "I know that an empire is like a body," she replied, her voice steady. "A sickness from within is far more dangerous than any external threat. You are looking for an enemy army at your gates, Kaido. You should be looking for the poison in your own cup." He stared at her, a flicker of something other than rage in his eyes. It was a sliver of doubt, a hairline crack in his absolute certainty. For the first time, he was seeing her not as a beautiful possession, but as a person with a mind of her own. He strode over to her, stopping just inches away. The air crackled with a tension that was different from the animosity of the past few days. It was charged, dangerous. "And what do you see, Imani?" he whispered, his voice rough with whiskey and fury. She did not back down. She met his intense gaze without flinching. "I see a king who is so distracted by a new trinket that he has forgotten to watch his throne." The words hit him harder than a physical blow. He searched her face, looking for the jealousy, the hurt he expected to find. He found only a chilling, unreadable calm. This cool, strategic woman was a stranger to him. In his attempt to break her, he had forged her into something new, something sharp and dangerous. That night, for the first time in years, he did not sleep in his own bed. He slept on the couch in his wrecked office, the ghost of her words haunting him more than the loss of any deal. The war for his empire was escalating, and he was fighting the wrong enemy. With Kaido consumed by his phantom war against the Suzuki clan, Imani moved to her next target. Mr. Watanabe was the clan's treasurer, an old man who had served Kaido's father for 40 years. He was a man of tradition and honor, who viewed Kaido's flashy lifestyle and public indiscretions with quiet disapproval. He was loyal not to Kaido the man, but to the institution of the Tanakagumi. Imani knew he was the heart of the organization. If she could turn him, the body would die. She arranged a visit to the Zojoji Temple, a place Watanabe frequented to pay respects to Kaido's late father. She found him lighting incense, his back ramrod straight despite his age. "Watanabe-sen," she said, her voice soft. He turned, his expression impassive, but his eyes held a deep sadness. He had witnessed her humiliation at the gala and, unlike the others, had not looked away. He had met her gaze with one of profound shame for his boss. "Tanaka-sama," he greeted her with a formal bow. "I came to pay my respects to the first boss," she said, lighting her own stick of incense. He was a great man. He understood that our way of life is built on a foundation of honor, of duty, of respect. Each word was a carefully aimed dart. Watanabe remained silent, his face a stoic mask. He would be disappointed to see how things are now. Imani continued, her voice barely a whisper. The family name being dragged through the mud in gossip columns. The traditions he held so sacred being treated as an inconvenience. The young boss has a different style, Watanabe said, his voice raspy with age. It is not a matter of style, Imani countered, her voice hardening slightly. It is a matter of character. Kaido's father built this empire on the principle of shared sacrifice. The clan eats first, the boss eats last. Is that still the way things are done? The question was a direct challenge. Watanabe's eyes narrowed. He knew exactly what she was implying. Days later, an anonymous, encrypted file appeared on his home computer. It contained bank records, offshore account numbers, and transaction logs. It was irrefutable proof that Kaido had been skimming millions from the clan's central funds to finance his personal extravagances, including a lavish apartment for Rina and a collection of rare sports cars. He was breaking the most sacred code of their world. He was stealing from his own family. The financial hemorrhaging started subtly. A key shipment was delayed at customs because the usual bribe had not been paid. A monthly payment to a key politician was lost in a wire transfer. Soldiers in the field found their expense accounts suddenly frozen. The flow of money that was the lifeblood of the Tanaka-gumi had slowed to a trickle. Watanabe, with surgical precision, was strangling the organization from the inside, using his complete control over the treasury to starve it of resources. Panic began to set in. Kaido, still focused on his war with the Suzukis, was blind to the real threat. He grew increasingly paranoid and violent, trying to control his crumbling empire through fear. One evening, after a particularly disastrous meeting where 3 of his sub-bosses reported failing enterprises, he returned to the penthouse in a black mood. He found Imani in the living room, reading a book. The calm, domestic scene seemed to enrage him further. Everything is falling apart, he seethed, pacing the room like a caged tiger. My men are losing faith. They whisper behind my back. Loyalty cannot be bought, Kaido, Imani said without looking up from her book. But it can be sold. That was when he finally snapped. He crossed the room in 2 strides and ripped the book from her hands, throwing it across the room. He grabbed her by the upper arms, his grip bruising, and hauled her to her feet. For the first time, his raw, physical power was directed at her. What do you know? He demanded, his face inches from hers. What have you been doing? Imani stared into his furious eyes, her own heart hammering against her ribs. But she did not let the fear show. She had prepared for this moment. This was the point of no return. Me, she said, her voice a blade of ice. I have been doing nothing but watch. I watched you disgrace me. I watched you alienate your most loyal men. I watched you place your own greed above the good of the family. She leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. You are so busy looking for enemies outside these walls. You never once thought to look at the woman sleeping in your bed. You should have been watching your soldiers, Kaido, not your wife. He reeled back as if she had struck him. The accusation, so close to the truth yet so far from what he could comprehend, left him speechless. He saw the defiance in her eyes, the utter lack of fear, and in that moment, a sliver of the terrifying truth began to dawn on him. He wasn't losing his empire. It was being taken from him. The final piece of her plan was the one that had started it all, Rina. Imani knew that as long as the Mistress remained a symbol of Kaido's power, he retained a shred of his public authority. She had to be removed from the board. But a simple disappearance would only make Kaido more suspicious. It had to be a choice. Imani found Rina at the opulent Ginza apartment Kaido had bought for her. She didn't bring guards or weapons. She came alone, dressed in a simple, elegant black dress, carrying a leather briefcase. Rina opened the door, her confidence faltering when she saw who it was. She was used to being the victor, the one who held the power. But the woman standing before her was not the humiliated wife from the gala. This was someone else entirely. May I come in? Imani asked, her tone polite but firm. Without waiting for an answer, She walked past Rina into the apartment, her eyes taking in the expensive, tasteless decor. "He has given you a beautiful cage. What do you want?" Rina asked, her voice trembling slightly. Imani placed the briefcase on the table and opened it. Inside, it was filled not with money but with documents. "I am offering you a way out," Imani said, her voice low and serious. "Kaido is finished. His organization is collapsing. When it falls, everyone close to him will be dragged down into the rubble. The other clans will not be merciful. They will see you as an extension of him." She pushed a folder across the table. "This contains a passport with a new name, a plane ticket to Zurich, and the details of a bank account containing enough money for you to live comfortably for the rest of your life, anywhere you choose." Rina stared at the folder, then back at Imani, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and disbelief. "Why would you do this for me?" "This isn't for you," Imani said coldly. "This is a business transaction. You are a tool Kaido used to humiliate me. Now you are a loose end I am tying up. You have 2 hours. Take the offer and disappear forever, or stay and face the consequences of his downfall. Your choice." Imani turned and walked to the door. She paused with her hand on the handle. "He never loved you, you know. He loved what you represented, a rebellion against a life he chose but grew to resent. A life that included me." She left without another word, leaving Rina alone with the choice that would seal Kaido's fate. An hour later, Imani received a simple text message, a flight confirmation number. The queen had been removed from the board. Now it was time for the checkmate. The emergency meeting of the Tanakagumi captains was held in the cavernous, wood-paneled boardroom of the family's headquarters. The air was thick with tension and the metallic scent of fear. Kaido stood at the head of the long table, his face a grim mask of authority. He looked diminished, the bespoke suit hanging loosely on a frame that had lost its arrogant posture. He was there to demand loyalty, to root out the traitors he now knew must exist. "There's been a sickness in this family," he began, his voice echoing in the silent room. "Whispers, failures, betrayal." His eyes scanned the faces of his men, searching for a flicker of guilt. He found only hard, unreadable stares. Then, Haru Yoshida, the young Captain Imani had first cultivated, stood up. "Boss," he said, his voice respectful but firm. "The sickness is not with the soldiers. It is with the general." A collective gasp went through the room. It was an unprecedented act of defiance. "The Hakodate deal was lost because of your carelessness," Haru continued, his confidence growing. "You were distracted. You brought shame upon this family and upon your own house." Before Kaido could respond, old Mr. Watanabe, the treasurer, rose slowly to his feet. He placed a thin ledger on the table. "And you have been stealing from us," he said, his voice shaking with righteous fury. "From your own brothers. You have broken your father's code." Kaido's face went pale.
He was cornered, exposed.
The foundations of his power, fear and respect, were crumbling before his eyes. He opened his mouth to roar, to deny, to threaten, but at that exact moment, the heavy boardroom doors swung open. Imani entered. The room fell into a stunned silence. She was not supposed to be here. This was a sacred space for the men of the clan. She was dressed in a razor-sharp black pantsuit, her hair pulled back severely. She was no longer the wife in white silk. She was an executioner. She walked silently to the table, her heels clicking with unnerving precision on the polished floor. She did not look at the shocked captains. Her eyes were fixed on one person, her husband. She placed a single, thick file on the table in front of his seat. It landed with a soft, final thud. Inside was everything. Every detail of his affair, every illegal transaction she had uncovered, every conversation she had recorded, and detailed plans of how she had systematically turned his own men against him. It was the complete architecture of his ruin. She said nothing. She didn't need to. Her presence, the file, the cold, unwavering certainty in her eyes, it was a more complete condemnation than any words could ever be. Kaido stared at the file, then up at her face. And in that moment, he finally truly saw her. He saw the brilliant, ruthless strategist he had foolishly dismissed as a mere decoration. He saw the woman who had weathered his public humiliation not with tears, but with a vow of silent, total war. He had tried to break her spirit, and instead, he had unleashed a force that had methodically unmade his entire world. He had lost. He had lost his empire, his honor, his future. And he had lost it all to the one person he never even considered a player in the game. Having delivered the final, fatal blow, Imani turned her back on him and on the men who would now pick over the bones of his fallen kingdom. She walked out of the boardroom and did not look back. She stepped out into the cool Tokyo night, the city lights glittering like scattered jewels at her feet. She had paid a terrible price, sacrificing the woman she once was. But as she breathed in the free air, she knew she had won the only thing that mattered, herself.